I will take a page out of Professor Doyle's speech in the morning. She said that this concept of intersectionality, as I mentioned in the morning, is relatively recent as far as to me, recent exposure to me. So some of the papers actually, as he said, did look very abstract to me when I read them, like some of my own paintings, as you can see. But what I am trying to do is to try and develop an approach which is more practical, which maybe will be useful for students and other people who try to do data analysis in a quantitative way, and how does intersectionality inform that kind of approach, or look at quantitative analysis. I just show this to show that where I stand, because I am an epidemiologist. I am trained in a quantitative school, so that is my background, but I also believe that this is very important. Dennis Burkitt, of course, to the doctors will be familiar as the person who described Burkitt's lymphoma. He said that not everything that counts can be counted. I also believe that. So, but there's a lot, but there's another side to that, that is that there is a lot that can be counted, which are not really counted nowadays. That is also true. So what defines quantitative approaches? To me, it is about measurement. Actually, Dr. Mishra also was speaking the same thing. A lot of things, quantitative means can you measure? So that is the most important characteristic of the approach. And when you ask that question, then the thing is, what is it that you are trying to measure? That is the object of measurement, and what is your tool, and what is the process of measurement, whether it is free of biases, etc. So these are the three things that come with it, the process of measurement. So then the question is, has intersectionality itself as a concept been defined in such a way that it can be measured? And the second question is, if yes, why at all should we attempt to measure? My answers to this is, one is that as such that concept may be not possible to measure. That is, I am open to correction, because this is as far as my reading goes, which is limited. But it is an approach, so it can inform your attempts to measure other things like inequity or outcome measures. So we can incorporate insights from intersectionality research into quantitative approaches, and that is what I call intersectionality-informed quantitative research. Why is measurement important? There are several reasons, and one of the most important reasons is that when we are looking for remedial action or policies or interventions or programs, because you want to know which is the most important aspect to intervene on. So the most important question I am trying to answer, which is again came up in the morning, especially Professor Thangappan asked this question, the interaction is the same as intersectionality. That is what I am trying to answer. And is there a need to go beyond conventional epidemiological approaches to incorporate intersectionality in analysis? My answer is yes. And interaction is not, of course it is related, but interaction in statistical terms is defined differently, and it has a specific statistical meaning which should not be confused with intersectionality. That is my answer to the first question. Now, why is it not part of traditional epidemiology? Because I am speaking more from the epidemiology perspective. Because the traditional paradigm looks at a main effect, and there are the other variables are treated as practically they are treated as nuisances. So to be kind of controlled, or so that is the problem with that kind of an approach. In the epidemiological approach, the main effect is an exposure, and the covariates are of two types. They may be confounders or effect modifiers. And effect modification is what statisticians call interaction. We will come to that in a moment. The aim of epidemiological analysis usually is to eliminate the effects of confounders by either pooling effect, pooling like Mandel-Hansel or whatever technique you use, or by multivariate techniques. But the caution always is given that effect modifiers should always be highlighted. So, if it is not confounder, it is an effect modifier, and you have to highlight and show that the effect is different in different levels. So, that is the classical approach. So, what is this effect measure modification? Effect measure modification simply is, of course, it is sometimes used interchangeably, and that has also been challenged. What is effect modification is not really effect measure modification, but I will not quibble about that. But it means that how a factor affects the effect of one factor on the outcome is affected by a third factor, that is effect modification. So, the influence of A on the outcome X is uniform across all strata of B, then A and B are not, and B is not modifying the effect of A. But if it is different across the strata of B, then B is modifying the effect of A on X. So, that is the simplest kind of definition. But there is a serious problem with this definition, as has been pointed out by Rothman in his textbook and in many writings. But unfortunately, Rothman for some reason is in epidemiological circles is, in fact, I remember one of my professors told me specifically that don't read Rothman because Rothman has non-standard ideas. So, people are looking for standardization of ideas also. So, even though he has written many textbooks and is successful as a textbook writer, there are many people who don't agree with him. The reason why he says it should not be treated as the same is because this, this definition is not unique in the sense it can vary according to the context. So, you don't want such kind of a definition. That is what he means. That is, it is dependent on the outcome, how the outcome is measured. A situation which satisfies the definition of the effect measure when using a difference measure does not hold good for a ratio measure, and that is what is shown in this graph. So, this lower line represents, let us look at this as, this line represents the effect, the level of the effect in the unexposed people. Can be anything. You can look at what is the utilization rate among the poor versus the rich, or rather it's now the one axis is age. So, you can say this is male and this is female or vice versa, whatever. So, there is a difference between the two sexes, but this difference is the same across all age groups. So, if you look at the difference measure, there is no effect modification by age, because the difference is the same across all age groups. But if you take the ratio of male by female or female by male, then obviously here at the age of 15 it is almost equal, but here it is very unequal. So, the ratio is bound to be different. So, you will say that there is effect modification if you take a ratio measure, but there is no effect modification if you take a difference measure. And this dotted line shows the other situation. The ratio is the same, the difference varies. So, here you would be saying that effect modification is there in the ratio, in the difference, but not in the ratio. So, then the question is which is correct. So, where is the effect modification, in the dotted line or the solid line? So, that is the point that Rothman is making. So, you need a definition which is clearly different from this. You can't do with this kind of a definition. And this is another example just with numbers to make it more clear. Let us say two strata, poor and rich. Let us take that as socioeconomic strata, and let us say men and women, and the disease rate is 2 and 4, 1 and 3, like that. So, here in the first, among the poor, the rate ratio is 2, rate difference is 2. Among the rich, the rate ratio is 3, rate difference is still 2, which means that the modification in the ratio measure, but not in the difference measure, just like the lines I showed.
And it's economic level that is the modifier.
Yes. And the gender, you are looking at gender differences, but across economic strata, and economic strata in classical economical epidemiological parlance we would say it is modifying the effect of gender. Same thing with a difference measure, that is modification in difference measure. Difference is varying across the strata, but the ratio is the same. So, here you would say that there is modification of the difference measure, but not the ratio. Now, this is what Rothman is questioning. So, in the classical approach to looking at effect modification in health research is usually through stratified analysis like I have just showed. Look at the relation between the exposure and outcome across different strata of the third variable or fourth variable, fifth variable, like that. But again the problem is, again that has been discussed again and again in the morning and even the previous session, when we have multiple axes of differences, very soon the numbers in each cell will be very low, and then the estimation becomes unstable and you can't say anything about it. So, that is the problem. So, one solution is to use modeling. You can also use multivariate methods, especially logistic regression, and introduce an interaction term and assess the significance of interaction term. Classically, what epidemiologists do is throw in an interaction term, and that is what Professor Thankapan said in the morning. Put in an interaction term, it is significant, you say that there is significant in effect modification. So, you should not use summary measures, make separate models for the two strata or whatever it is that is causing the interaction. So, but again here also there is a problem, because again significance is a function of sample size. So, any small effect can become significant if there are enough numbers. It is a huge survey, any interaction may be significant. So, you will be saying that you cannot build a model, and that approach is also not very desirable. But there is also another important, more theoretical objection to this, is that the same thing as Rothman says, because multivariate methods such as logistic regression focus on the odds ratio, and this is a measure of it's a ratio measure. So, by using logistic regression you are focusing on the effect modification on the ratio measure, and that is forced on the data. So, you are not looking at the difference measure, and many epidemiologists believe that the difference measure is more important when looking at effect modification. So, that is the objection that Rothman has and many other people also have. So, however, many epidemiologists believe that the difference in rates should be the basis of definition of effect modification. So, he suggests that effect modification should be recognized as clearly separate from statistical interaction. And if you take a suggestion which apply mainly to epidemiology, you can extend it to other quantitative fields in health, modifying them slightly. We can develop a framework for defining and measuring effect modification, which is applicable across all types of studies. And I won't go into the details because there is no time, and also because it takes a lot of explanations and it would multiply this number of slides. I will just sum up the whole thing saying that if A and B are both categories of interest, and then from a logistic regression model, what you can do is you can put A, B and A into B as variables into the model, and derive the odds ratios for the outcome of interest associated with each of these A, B, and both A and B, and then you use this expression. This is OR of A and B minus 1 minus OR of A minus 1 plus OR of B minus 1. That is, independent effect of A and B added together should be the same as the independent effect of the both things to the A and B group. So, if this is the same, or if this minus this is 0, that is the same thing as saying that these should be the same, then you can say that there is effect measure modification, and you can measure it using this expression. So, this definition of effect measure modification could be acceptable as a quantitative approach to intersectionality. Is that what I feel? I mean, quantitatively informed approach to intersectionality, and you can actually use this to measure what is the difference in different groups. Of course, this is exactly more or less what Professor Misra showed by the Oaxaca decomposition also. Using this method, actually you would be able to say what proportion of effect is there when there is no exposure, plus there is A alone, there is B alone, and there is A and B together. So, you can actually apportion the effect in the 4 groups, and then you will be able to say whether A and B are important or the A and B together are more important. So, that is the whole point of this kind of a analysis. So, summing up, what is important is, first of all you have to define the categories to be included, that is should be informed by theory or your previous studies or whatever, and the aim should be to describe variation and not confined to summaries and averages, and look for differences along multiple axes. This is Rouhani, and so exploring differences is the most important point that I would like to stress. In a multivariate model also, one variable is dominant, as sometimes it is. When it is included, other things go out, and that is again one of the problems of this kind of software that we are using, that when you put stepwise or whatever, it takes one by one and throws out the others, and there is a completely thoughtless process, and that is what SPSS does. Unless you control the SPSS, it will start controlling you, and then that is the problem. So then actually, if there is one variable which is dominant, like suppose you put in gender and everything else goes out, what it is telling you is that you have to look at men and women separately, because that one variable is explaining everything, means that there is something. I mean, if you want to look at the other categories, you have to look at those two, separate classes. But of course, that means that sample size will be reduced, but that is another problem. So, try to, when if you want to do a quantitative exploration of data, and you also want to include an intersectional approach into your analysis, these are some of the things that you have to do. Try to incorporate a quantitative as well as a qualitative perspective. That is, ideally you can explore, you can do formative research or whatever to try to find out what are the categories that should be in your questionnaire or your tool, so that you don't miss out on, and then define, as Professor Misra explained, calculate your sample size in such a way that you do have enough numbers in all the cells, and locate the study in the context and define the axis of analysis before we look at the data, if possible, even if during the design of the study itself. Be as descriptive as possible. Be as descriptive as possible. Look at all possible categorizations. This is another thing. This is again for the sake of the students I am saying, and I have seen this over and over again in spite of telling them repeatedly. I think some things you say don't make an impact. See, everybody is very eager to jump into the ultimate final model, logistic regression. Or, you don't look at the descriptives. You don't want to look at this way and that way, and various axes of analysis, and just look at the tables and try to understand what story is emerging from that. So, you want to summarize. That urge to summarize is always very, very powerful. So, that is another thing. Be as descriptive as possible. Use a consistent approach to effect measure modification if you want to use it as one way of looking at intersectionality. And Rothman's approach can be, I think it's fairly a good approach to use. And focus on estimation of effects. That is, what is the magnitude of the coefficients rather than on the statistical significance. That's again another thing that we tell students, but they don't pay much attention to. They always want the p-values because they believe that is the ultimate. But again, it is a function of the numbers. So what we should be looking at is the effect sizes. So that is a conclusion. Quantitative analysis tends to focus on main effects and measuring the size of the effect, and that is all important. That is the problem with mainstream establishment methods, as so to speak, especially in epidemiology, because epidemiology comes from a background of looking for an exposure. The terms are also very informative. So you are looking for an exposure, one exposure which results in one outcome. But the world is not so simple. There are multiple exposures, or rather multiple variables and multiple outcomes. So that is one thing you have to keep in mind. Summarizing as a means of achieving efficiency is given priority, so that should not be. That is, I should be saying that that is not what we should do. So this is just a negative statement. So go away from summarizing. Summarizing is important. You can summarize, but also look at the variety and the variability and the pattern. If quantitative analysis is to be informed by intersectionality, then it is important to describe the variability even at the cost of your statistical significance or your summary. And the richness of reproduction of quantitative patterns should have priority over precision in estimation. Again, by nature, people who do quantitative analysis like to they are attracted towards elegant, precise, concise models, and I think we should suppress that instinct and look for the messy things and try to understand what is telling us. I think that's all. Thank you.